Picture this. You are standing in a forest 9 million years before anything you would call human exists. There is no fire yet, no language, no word for hunger, even though hunger is the only thing you understand. But there is fruit on the ground, gone soft, smelling strange, almost sweet, almost sharp, almost wrong. Most animals would walk past it. You do not have that option. Food that has gone bad today is still food tomorrow. So you eat it anyway. And something in your body, something ancient and already waiting, knows exactly what to do with what is hiding inside that fruit. That something is alcohol. Your ancestors were built to handle it, long before anyone ever meant to make it on purpose. Now compare that to tonight. Somewhere, right now, someone is holding a cold glass, music playing, without a single thought about where any of this actually came from. We treat alcohol like a human invention. A recipe. A choice someone made deliberately in some smoky tavern a few thousand years ago. But the real story starts millions of years earlier, in the stomachs of animals who never once thought about brewing anything. And it leads somewhere you would not expect. To a funeral. To a temple built before farming existed. To a mutation still sitting inside your own body right now. Every single one of those stops was uncovered by scientists who spent years testing residue on broken pottery and stone, just to answer one deceptively simple question. When did we first start drinking and why? In 2014, a biologist named Matthew Carrigan asked a strange question. When did primates first get good at digesting alcohol? His team rebuilt an ancient gene called ADH4, the enzyme that breaks ethanol down in your gut and liver, and tested how well old versions of it actually worked. For most of primate history, it barely worked at all. A little alcohol would go straight into the bloodstream, uncontested. Carrigan put it bluntly. Without the right version of this gene, an early ancestor would have been what he called a cheap date, drunk on just a couple of fallen fruits. Then, around 10 million years ago, a single mutation appeared in the ancestor we share with chimpanzees and gorillas. That mutation made the enzyme 40 times more efficient at breaking down ethanol, almost overnight in evolutionary terms. Carrigan's theory is that this lines up with our ancestors coming down out of the trees onto a forest floor covered in fallen, fermenting fruit. The animal that could safely eat that fruit had food that others simply could not touch, without stumbling around half-poisoned by it. It was never about the buzz. It was about survival. The primate who could handle a little alcohol got dinner. The one who could not went hungry or worse. Scientists now call this the drunken monkey hypothesis. Your taste for alcohol is not a modern weakness. It is a 10-million-year-old inheritance. Which means every single person watching this carries a small piece of that forest floor inside them, whether they ever touch a drink or not. Now fast forward, past the mutation, past millions of years of fruit-eating ancestors, to a cave in what is now northern Israel. The cave is called Reykjavik, and around 13,000 years ago, it was not just a shelter. It was a graveyard. A hunter-gatherer people called the Natufians buried their dead here, carving stone mortars straight into the cave floor. In 2018, researchers from Stanford University examined the residue still clinging to those mortars, thousands of years after anyone had used them. What they found was starch and microscopic plant particles, exactly what you would expect from brewing beer, not from simply grinding grain into flour. These were people with no farms, no permanent villages, no written language of any kind. And yet they were running a 3-stage brewing process, malting the grain, mashing it down, and letting wild airborne yeast finish the job. The researchers believe this beer was not for everyday drinking. It was made for something heavier. Funerals. They think the Natufians brewed beer specifically to honor their dead, turning grief into a shared ritual, softened at the edges by fermentation. Sit with that for a second. Before the wheel. Before writing. Before a single planted field anywhere on Earth, humans were already brewing alcohol to mourn each other. And here is the twist worth pausing on. Beer might actually be older than bread. For decades, the assumption was simple. Humans settled down, farmed grain to eat, and beer came later, almost as a side effect. But Reykjavik flips that story. It suggests people wanted the drink badly enough that they domesticated the grain just to keep making it. That single idea quietly rewrites a lot of what we assume about why civilization even started in the first place. Now travel north to a hill in modern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, dated to roughly 11,000 years ago. This is not a village. It is a ring of massive carved stone pillars, some weighing tons, decorated with foxes, snakes, and birds carved in relief. It was built entirely by hunter-gatherers before agriculture existed anywhere on the planet, before a single field had ever been planted. Archaeologists have found more than 600 stone vessels here, some large enough to hold over 50 gallons of liquid. Alongside them sit tens of thousands of smashed animal bones, the unmistakable leftovers of enormous, repeated feasts. A 2012 study in the journal Antiquity concluded these hunter-gatherers were almost certainly drinking beer, brewed from fermented wild grain, as part of these gatherings. Building Göbekli Tepe took an extraordinary amount of coordinated labor, hauling multi-ton stones across open ground with no wheels and no draft animals. You do not get strangers from scattered bands to cooperate on that kind of work for free. You need a reason to bring them together and a reason to bring them back next season. Feasting did that. And beer sat right at the center of it, the thing people showed up for as much as the ritual itself. Some researchers now argue the pressure to keep producing enough grain for these gatherings is part of what pushed people toward deliberately planting wheat instead of just gathering it wild. Which means the drink some of us pour at the end of a long week may have quietly helped trigger the invention of agriculture itself. That is a big enough claim to sit with. This channel is still small and honestly still finding its footing, and if a claim like that is worth your time, subscribing genuinely helps more people find this kind of history, and it keeps me able to keep making it. Because the story does not stop there. Head east to the Yellow River Valley of China, to a Neolithic village called Jiahu. Around 9,000 years ago, researcher Patrick McGovern and his team analyzed residue baked into ancient pottery from the site. Published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2004, the findings revealed a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or grape. Not beer, not wine, but a hybrid, a cocktail of whatever fermentable ingredients happened to be sitting around that season. Meanwhile, in the region of modern Georgia, chemical residue found on ancient pottery jars points to the earliest known wine made specifically from grapes, dated to roughly 8,000 years ago. That research, led by McGovern's team and published in 2017, pushed the known origins of grape winemaking back by centuries. And further west, in the mountains of Iran, a single building at a site called Göbekli Tepe once held both traditions side by side, wine residue in one room, barley beer residue in the next. China, the Caucasus, the mountains of Iran, the hills of the Fertile Crescent, regions thousands of miles apart, all landing on fermentation within a few thousand years of each other. Nobody was copying anybody across those distances. Wild yeast exists everywhere on Earth. Once humans started storing food and liquid in containers, fermentation was always going to happen, whether anyone planned it or not. McGovern did not stop at analyzing these residues. He spent years working with a real brewery, recreating these ancient recipes as closely as science allows, just to see what our ancestors were actually drinking. The results were strange, cloudy, and nothing like a modern bottle of beer or wine. But they were, by every chemical measure, remarkably close to the real thing. Which brings us to the real thesis buried underneath all of this evidence. Nobody actually invented alcohol. It invented itself, over and over, anywhere sugar, water, and wild yeast happened to meet. What humans invented was noticing it. And then, crucially, choosing to keep it around on purpose. That one choice may have quietly shaped some of our biggest turning points as a species. Communal ritual. Coordinated labor between strangers. Even the long, slow shift from wandering to farming. Look at almost any ancient culture you can name, and you will find fermented drinks somewhere near the center of it, in tombs, in temples, in trade routes stretching across entire continents. Now for the nuance, because the full picture here is messier than a tidy origin story. The idea that beer came before bread is still genuinely debated among archaeologists, and it has been for decades. Some researchers think the evidence is being stretched further than it can actually hold. The residue evidence at Göbekli Tepe is suggestive, not definitive. Some of the chemical tests run on the vessels were not sensitive enough to fully confirm fermentation took place there. And there is a deeper limit to all of this. Alcohol itself does not survive in the archaeological record. It evaporates, even from sealed containers, leaving nothing but faint traces behind. So everything from before people started using pottery is essentially invisible to us. The story could easily stretch back further than any of this evidence can prove. Treat this less as a closed case and more as one of archaeology's most compelling, still open questions. There is also a harder truth hiding underneath all of it. The same trait that once helped our ancestors survive now works against a lot of us. In the wild, ethanol always arrived bundled with fiber, water, and nutrients at very low concentrations, rarely more than 1 or 2%. Modern alcohol is nothing like that. A glass of wine today can carry 5 or 6 times that concentration, with none of the fiber or nutrients that used to come attached to it. Scientists call this an evolutionary mismatch. A trait that made complete sense in an ancient forest, now facing a modern world it was never built for. The gene has not changed in 10 million years. Everything around it has, and it is still catching up. So the next time you see someone holding a drink, you are looking at something genuinely strange. A piece of biology older than humanity itself, wrapped around a habit that may have helped build civilization as we know it. It was not clever. It was not planned. It was an accident our bodies were already prepared for, long before we ever had a word for it. Every toast, every cheers, every drink raised at a wedding or a funeral is a tiny echo of a Natufian burying their dead in a cave 13,000 years ago. Here is a question worth sitting with. Out of everything in this video, the ancient gene, the funeral beer, the stone circle in Turkey, which fact actually surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely read every one. Because the strangest part of being human was never the invention itself. It was noticing what nature had already made and deciding again and again that it was worth keeping.